Warm greetings. Welcome to Swayam Online Learning Portal. I am Dr. S. Ishwari, Head of the Department of Geography, Madras Christian College. In the previous lecture, we have discussed on temperature inversion. In this lecture, we will be discussing about local temperature variation. So, what are all the contents we are going to discuss today? How the temperature varies locally in local condition, and what are all the factors which is going to control, either it may be a natural or it may be a human factor, how it is influenced by the surface, altitude and water, and how far it modifies by the solar radiation and wind pattern. So, and how it creates the local microclimate changes. So, these are all the contents we are going to discuss today. So, local temperature variation. So, local temperature varies with relief, surface and sunlight. So, how far the relief condition is there, either it is a plain section or it may be a higher altitude. So, that determines the local temperature. How far the surface? In the previous lectures, we have discussed about the various surface and what are all the reactivity, either it absorbs and what type of absorption it is, either the reflectivity is there. So, it differs, the surface differs in the reflectivity, absorption and other processes, and how far the receiverance of sunlight. So, these are all the factors which determines the temperature variation in the locality, and how it is influenced by the latitudes, altitudes, land, water, winds, and how the human activities influences the local temperature variations. It creates, because of all these interference, it creates a microclimates like urban heat islands. So, it also affects the agricultural activity, health of the human beings and energy use. So, these are all the important factors which affects because of the variation of local temperatures. It also explained by the temperature differences. So, we will be discussing this one elaborately in the upcoming slides. So, the factors which affects the local temperature are the altitude, latitude and terrain shape with the temperature differences. So, we can witness all these differences in these process, that is these factors. The land water distribution influences the thermal contrast. So, how far the land heats and how far the land cools, how far the water heats and how far the water cools. So, that difference makes the variation in the temperature. And surface type, either it may be a forest or vegetation cover, or it may be a desert region, or it may be a concrete buildings, that in turn influences the local temperature. And the atmospheric moisture modifies the heating and cooling processes. The human activities, which is the most important factor, which is influenced the increase in the heating generation and retention. So, these are all the major factors which adversely affect the local temperatures. Role of solar radiation. The solar radiation mainly generated by the source of the sun's radiation, which is heating the surface of the earth. The surface of the earth is heated by the solar radiation. So, the cloud cover. So, cloud cover in turn affects the solar radiation. How it affects it? It absorbs the incoming solar radiation. By the absorption, it is it result in a adverse change in the receiverance of the incoming solar radiation. So, heating process also differs because of the cloud cover. And solar angle. So, we have discussed in the temperature inversion in previous lectures, that is the time of the day and season mainly affect the sun's angle, which controls the heating intensity. So, if it is going to be sunrise or sunset, there will the intensity of the solar radiation which is received by the earth's surface will be minimum. If it is going to be noon time, it will be maximum. So, that angle variation and seasonal contrast, that is summer season and winter season, how far the contrastivity of the receiverance of solar radiation mainly affects the local temperature. The shading reduces the direct insolation and surface heating. how the shading is affected the incoming solar radiation, that is the shading in the way that if there is any vegetation cover or if there is any cloud cover, that filters and give back the incoming solar radiation. So, the receiverance of incoming solar radiation will be somewhat comparatively minimum in that particular locality. So, the albedo also determines how much heat is observed or reflected. So, the albedo effect, so we know that the albedo effect is different for various surfaces. The reflectivity differs from one surface to another surface. So, which in turn adversely affect the that is local temperature of that particular region. Next is the influence of latitudes. So, latitudes that is the equatorial region which receives the direct sunlight. So, because of that the higher temperature will be there. So, the region which is here present here will receive the higher temperature and heating process will also be very high in this equatorial region. And the high latitudes get oblique rays, that is here in the polar region. Because of oblique rays and heating process is the wider region, because of that the receiving of heat energy in this particular zone will be minimum compared to the equatorial region. The small latitudinal difference also cause the local temperature variation. If there is a very minor that is difference in the latitude also, there will be a adverse change in the temperature receiverance in the locality. That is the latitude controls day length and season, which in turn affect the heating process of that particular latitudes. It also influences the vegetation cover, that is if there is a receiverance of temperature is minimum, what happens in the polar region? It does not support the growth of the vegetation. In turn, in the torrid zone, it supports because of intense heating and receiving of high precipitation in this region, which supports the vegetation growth, the forest, tropical forest, evergreen forest distributed in this region. So, in such a way it is very much helpful in the variation of local temperature. And then surface albedo is also one of the important factor which determines the local temperature variations. The next important factor is altitude variations, that is the temperature decreases 6.5 degrees Celsius per kilometer in altitude. If there is a rise in the altitude, there is a decrease of 6.5 degrees Celsius per kilometer. That is the higher altitude hill station are cooler than the plain section. We can analyze in day to day life itself, you can compare, that is if someone is living in the plain section, if someone is living in the hill station. So, is in the same latitude, is the temperature receiverance will be same? If the local climate will be same? No, it differs. So, even though it is the same latitude, the receiving of temperature or the that is the local temperature varies in these two contrast regions. The thin air retains the less heat and lowers day and night temperature. So, in contrast, the cold air drainage cause the valley inversion and frost risk. So, in the temperature inversion, what we have discussed in the valley part, because of the settling cold air in the bottom of the valley, there it creates the colder condition, and in due course it was turned into process have been taken in the bottom of the valley. So, that is the main reason for the temperature variation in the locality, and wind also varies with altitudes, which affects the heat distribution. If there is a disturbance of wind in that particular region, it somehow decreases the temperature. So, in that way it is affecting the local temperature. Next one is land versus water, that is local contrast. So, land heats and cool very faster than the water. So, in the coastal areas there is a moderate temperature and there is a stable temperature will be there in the coastal regions. In the continental interiors, in contrast, it shows the large daily and seasonal range because of far away from the sea condition. The water bodies creates a cooler local microclimates. So, while you travel, you can witness if there is a open space, the temperature will be somewhat high, while you cross the near the water bodies, there will be a slight decrease in the temperature. So, that contrast will be observed in the local climate. The moist air reduces the daytime heating and extremes. So, the moist air plays a vital role in local temperature variations. The next important factor is oceanic influence on land temperature, that is sea breeze and land breeze, that is the wind blowing from water bodies to the land masses in the daytime, and then land breeze, that is from land towards the water bodies, that is ocean, in the night time. So, because of this day and night movement of wind which adversely affect the local temperature, and then the ocean current, that is warm and cold ocean current which circulates in the ocean, which adversely affect the temperature of the coastal region as well as the interior of the continents. That is, the high humidity reduces the day and night temperature because of high humidity condition. The large water bodies stabilizes the temperature and limits the extremity of the climate. Terrain, that is topography, that is the sun facing slope heats very faster because it receives the incoming solar radiation directly and it will be very intense, and the slope aspects, that is the windward side and leeward side, have which also plays an important role in the local temperature variation. That is, the temperature difference in the north or south slope will adversely affect the local temperature. The plain, which heats more uniformly than the rugged terrain, that is, if this plain is more smooth, the heat which will be received will be very uniform, and if the plain is rugged, if there is a interruption of either buildings or vegetation, that will adversely affect the local temperature of that particular region. The valley traps the cold air which cause the temperature inversion. So, in the temperature inversion we have discussed this one in an elaborate way. Mountain blocks the air movement affecting the local temperature. So, here while the air ascends and then after descending, this that is rise of air, and then there is a fall of air which adversely affect the local temperature because of the mountain influence. Next one is soil type and heat capacity. The soil type, that is dark soil, absorbs more heat energy and increases the surface temperature. And then the sand soil which will be a loose in content. So, because of that nature, the heat and it heat and cool quickly and it cause the rapid temperature changes. So, there is a contrastivity of the dark soil as well as the sand soil because of texture and the nature of content which is present in the soil, and moist soil, that is the clay soil, moist soil which have the cooler effect due to the evaporative cooling, and it keeps the night warmer. If it retains the temperature, what happens? The retainment of temperature due course, it keeps the entire place warmer in night times. The vegetation cover reduces the temperature extreme by shading effect and then evapotranspiration. So, this process have been done with the by the vegetation cover. So, because of that, it adversely affect the local temperature. The next factor is vegetation and forest cover, that is forest cover intercepts the sunlight, it interrupts the sunlight and keep the surfaces cooler. So, because it does not allow all the incoming solar radiation directly into the earth's surface, it have some filtration there. So, because of that, the receiving of solar radiation in the surface will be minimum compared to the clear open spaces. The evapotranspiration process, which also lowers the air temperature and raises the humidity condition of that particular locality. The dense canopies, if the canopy is very dense, what happens? It restricts the incoming solar radiation and it creates the cool condition, and shaded microclimate will be prevailing in that particular locality. The forest reduces a diurnal temperature range, as well as if there is a loss of vegetation due to deforestation process, which adversely leads to high temperature and temperature extremes in that particular region. Next one is a local humidity effect. So, how far humidity is mainly determining the local climate, that is moist air heats and cools slowly due to the high heat capacity, and then if it is going to be a high humidity region, it limits the daytime heating because all the moisture contents will be there, it restricts the heating process in the earth's surface. The low humidity which cause the rapid nighttime cooling. So, because of that, the fog and dew reduces the nighttime heat loss, and the humidity affects the heat index and then human comfort. So, if there is a high humidity, it adversely affects the comfortness of the human being. So, in such a way, this local humidity plays an important role in the variation of temperature of that particular locality. Cloud cover, the daytime cloud which reflects the sunlight and reduces the surface heating. If it is going to be a nighttime cloud, it traps the heat and keeps the temperature more warmer. And the cloud variations, that is the thickness of the clouds, the types of the clouds, it varies, that is it causes the short term temperature changes. If there is a dense clouds, it restricts the solar radiation. If it is going to be thin cloud, it comparatively it allows the solar radiation. In that contrast, the local temperature also varies. The convective clouds forms over the strongly heated surface. So, convection mainly happens in the heat transfer. So, because of that, the convective clouds have been formed in that particular local region. The clear skies allows the rapid nighttime cooling. So, because of no disturbance in the sky atmosphere, there is a rapid heating and cooling process in the clear sky region. So, in such a way, the cloud cover plays an important role in determining the local temperature. Wind effect, that is wind mix air layers, that is it reduces the temperature extremes, that is hot wind and then local cold wind, which rises, hot wind rises the local temperature and cold wind adversely cool the local temperature. The cooling effect will be there in the cold wind region. And building and trees modify the wind flow and microclimates, so which we have discussed in the previous slide. And local breezes, that is land breeze and sea breeze, also plays an important role in creating the short distance temperature differences. Next one is urban heat island, that is in the urban region there is a concrete buildings. So, because of this highly erected buildings, what happens? This buildings absorbs and retain the heat within itself. Because of that, a lack of vegetation in this region. So, see comparatively in the rural region there is a high vegetation cover, but in the urban region there is a comparatively low vegetation cover, fully it is covered by the buildings. Because of that, the increasing surface heating will be there in the urban region. The waste heat from the vehicles and air conditions rises the temperature. So, it also increases the CFCs and it adversely affect the that is ozone layer depletion and greenhouse effect. We all know that because of this reason only that process happens. The city stays warmer at night than the rural region. So, in the city region there will be comparatively warmer than the village side because of this highly erected buildings and lack of vegetation. The tall buildings traps the heat and intensifies the urban heat islands. So, this effect is highly witnessed in the urban region. The rural and urban temperature patterns. The rural areas cool faster at night due to open land. So, there is no disturbance. So, because of vast open region, the cooling and heating effect will be very much faster in the rural areas, and comparatively in the urban areas it retains the heat because of the diurnal, that is reducing diurnal range of temperature, and the cropland rise the humidity and moderate temperature because of its evapotranspiration process, and trees and natural shades lowers the daytime heating. So, it restricts the daytime heating of the earth surface in that particular area. The industrial zones create the local heat hotspots. So, the industries because of its pollution, emitting pollution, it adversely affect the local climate of that particular region. The slope aspect, that is sun facing slope versus shaded area, that is east facing slopes are warmer earlier in the morning sun, that is when the sun's rise, what happens, the east facing slope will be getting the receiving the solar radiation first, and then the west facing slope the heat later, but it heats later, but it's more intensively, it have the long lasting heat heat in that particular area region. The shaded aspects influences the vegetation patterns. Windward side will be having a high vegetation cover compared to the leeward side because of the receivance of incoming solar radiation and the that is plenty amount of precipitation is received in the windward side compared to the leeward side. The solar angle controls the local microclimates in this region. And then cold air drainage in valleys, that is the cold air will be very dense, because of that it settled in the valley at the bottom in the temperature inversion. We have discussed the same concept, and in the valley traps the cool air and becomes much cooler than the slope. So, because you have the cold dense air at the bottom and the warm air will be in this layer. So, because of this there is a temperature inversion will be there in this particular region, and in due course this cold air will be forming what, the frosty condition in the bottom of the valley, which cause the temperature inversion, and the slopes remains warmer as the cold air drains away. So, we have discussed that it is also known as a that is a drainage version, that is the inversion in the inversion temperature inversion lecture. The proximity to water bodies, that is the lake moderates the temperature with the slow heating and cooling. So, compared to the land surface, the water bodies will be heat slowly and it also cools slowly. So, because of this effect it adversely affect the local temperature. The cool breeze from the water lower nearby the land temperature, the water vapor which retains heat at the night time which warms the surrounding region. So, because of retaining heat which adversely affect the local climate. The seasonal extremes also reduce near the lake area, and the lake also influences the local climate and nearby settlements. The local seasonal variation, that is the winter nights and then summer days. The winter nights it have the cool strongly, especially when there is a dry and clear air condition, and if it is going to be a summer day it heats intensely. Because of that the interior region will be what, it will experiences the continentality, the heat will be very much high in the interior part of the continents. In monsoon clouds, that is the monsoon clouds reduces the summer temperature because of the rainfall, and then the seasonal wind also modifies the local climatic condition of that particular place. So, these are all the local seasons which adversely or strongly determines the temperature of that particular locality. Daily temperature cycle, that is, the temperature rises after sunrise as the surface absorbs the solar radiation, and the maximum will be at the mid afternoon, that is noon time. So, because of that there is a delayed heat release. The cooling starts after sunset. So, again this cooling process will be started after sunset. So, because of that, when solar input stops there, the cooling process start again. So, this minimum temperature just before the sunrise and sunset will be cooling that particular region in during these early morning and then evening time. The cycle influenced by the surface type and cloud. This cycle is mainly influenced by which factor? That is the surface, which surface is there, and then which cloud is present in that particular locality. So, that determines the daily temperature cycle of that particular local region. The local climates, that is the urban parks and green spaces in the urban region, which creates the cooler effect because of the vegetation and green spaces there. And this is mainly how it cools, it mainly because of the shade which is produced by the vegetation, and then evapotranspiration, the process which is done by the vegetation. The industrial zone generates what? Heat hotspot. If there is industry, there will be automatically pollution will be emitted by the machines. So, because of that emission of pollution, there will be adverse effect in that particular locality. The warm front areas stay cooler and the breezier due to land and water contrast because of the water fronts. So, this warm and cool condition that adversely affect the local climate. That is, the shaded streets are cooler and than the sun exposed road. So, if there is a continuous road, if you are traveling in a highway, what happens? You can experiences the high temperature if there is no interference of vegetation at the borders of the road. But if it is going to be a shaded streets, if vice versa, if you are traveling in the vegetation covered street, how you will be feeling? Somewhat you will be feeling a milder temperature than the open road travel. That is, the underground spaces maintain the stable temperature. The agriculture influence, how? The irrigated field stays cooler due to the evaporative cooling. So, the crop have the evapotranspiration process, because of that the irrigation field have some water in that particular space. So, due to that there is somewhat cooling effect in that region. The dry field heat quickly without the moisture, because there is no moisture content in the dry field, because of the dryness it heats quickly. The crop cover changes the surface albedo and heat absorption. So, we have come across the differential albedo effect for various surfaces. So, the same way the crop have its own albedo effect. So, because of that albedo, it adversely influences the local climate of that region. The transpiration from the crops cools the local area. So, earlier we have discussed that the evapotranspiration. So, this process plays an important role in determining the local temperature. The harvested field heat more from the exposed soil, because it will be open without any vegetation. So, the heat will be absorbed very fast, because of that the temperature will be increased in that particular locality. Snow cover effect. So, how the snow is covered effect? That is the albedo effect, that is the snow, ice, all these cooler particles reflects, that is albedo effect will be high, the reflectivity will be high, that is 80 to 90% of solar radiation, reduced heating will be there in snow covered region. So, because of that there will be a melting snow which absorbs the heat and delay in warming. Clear snow nights cause intense cooling via the radiation loss. The radiation is lost because of this clear snow nights. The snow covers influences the local and temperature patterns. So, in such a way that the snow cover plays an important role in determining the temperature variation. Fog and mist, that is, a fog blocks sunlight and it also reduces what daytime temperature, and the dense fog delays the morning warming. So, if there is a foggy condition, it does not allow the incoming solar radiation, that it will keep the land somewhat warmer in that region. And nighttime fog, which traps the heat and it limited the cooling. So, because of the trapping heat here, so in the night time the space, the surface of the earth will be somewhat warmer in condition. So, this day and night contrast is because of the fog and mist formation. The coastal fog moderates the local temperature and the river mist cools nearby the land in the early hours. So, in the river side in the early morning there will be a cooling effect because of the mist which is prevailing in that particular local region. Rainfall and local temperature, that is, the rain cools the air, lowers the surface temperature after the showers. So, after rain we will be having a pleasant temperature in that particular locality. The post rain have the evaporation which causes the additional cooling. So, after rain also, because before rain there, because of the prevailing wind and cloud condition, there is a cooling effect. After rain also there is a cooling effect. So, this frequent rainfall region have moderate temperature, and dry areas are heat rapidly due to low moisture, and rain shadow region which exhibit the sharp temperature contrast than the rainfall receiving region. The evaporation and cooling effect, that is, evaporation removes the heat causing the surface cooling. So, because of evaporation the surface will be very cold, and the wet cloth. So, for example, if we wear a wet cloth, what happens, in some times the cloth will be dried. Because of that, this is mainly due to the that is evaporation effect. The lakes and irrigated fields experience the evaporative cooling also. So, this wind and local humidity plays an important role in the in determining the local climate. The industrial heat source, that is the factories which release the excess heat, and because of that the plant have the thermal pollution which is emitted by the industry, and hot water is also discharged. So, it also affects the local temperature by warming that region, and heavy traffic which emits the higher pollution. So, because of that there is a higher temperature in that particular locality. So, the waste heat from the urban region, that is, either it may be a domestic heat or it may be a industrial heat, it adversely influence the local climate. The transportation corridors, that is in the highway. So, as we discussed earlier, in the highway it releases the heat continuously, and dark asphalt also absorbs the heat. So, this radiation and rising of temperature will be happening in the transport corridors. In the railway tracks, the track is also store and release the heat at night, and airport, that is, it creates the warm zones and from the concrete surfaces. Because of this transport corridors, it determines the local temperature of that particular region. Building materials, if it is going to be a concrete or asphalt, it stores heat and release it slowly, and the metal roofs also heat quickly, and it reflects, even though it reflects the temperature, the heat will be prevailing in that particular metal roofs. Bricks also have the effect in the local climate. The glass and dense buildings influences the heat distribution of that particular local places. Human activity, that is, air conditions will emit the heat energy and warms the surrounding air. The cooking and industrial heat emission also heats the locality more fast, and during the festival and first festival time, the fireworks which emits the pollution in a very high intensity, and the biomass burning also keeps the local temperature more warmer, and it also affects the local temperature adversely. To summarize this entire lecture, that is, the temperature varies from place to place due to the combined influence of both natural and human factor. The surface characteristics, that is latitude, altitude, proximity to water bodies, strongly affect the heating and cooling pattern, while solar radiation and wind further modify the local temperature. Together, these controls create the distinct local microclimates within the short distances. Hope you understand this lecture. In the upcoming lecture, we will be discussing on atmospheric pressure belts. Thank you.